Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session of the World Ocean Summit Asia Pacific. Thank you to The Economist for hosting it. My name is François Mosnier. I'm the head of the Ocean program at Planet Tracker. And today, we will talk about tools for trust and transparency in the fishing industry. First, I have to admit something. I am biased. I believe that more trust and transparency are needed in the fishing industry. And the goal of this session is to show you how this could be achieved and what are the benefits of implementing tools for trust and transparency. Now, thankfully, this task will not rest on my shoulders, but on our three speakers. We're very lucky today to have three excellent and experienced panelists. In alphabetical order, we've got Alistair Douglas, founder at Eachmile Technologies, Gloria Ramos, Vice President at Oceana, in charge of the Philippines, and Martin Exel, the Managing Director of SeaBOS. You'll find the full biographies of our panelists on the platform. Together, we will explain what trust and transparency mean in the fishing industry, what are the benefits and tools using concrete examples based on our speakers' experience. So let's dive straight in, starting with an easy question. I'll maybe start with you, Gloria, if that's okay. Gloria, how much trust do you have in the origin of the fish you buy? Do you feel there's enough transparency for you to make an informed decision, for instance?
In our country, there's still so much that needs to be done to ensure trust by the consumers and even on the part of our fisher folks who are protected, that their fishing grounds are not encroached by commercial fishing vessels. But reforms have been made, and I'm very thankful that we are on the way there. But it took a warning, a yellow card warning from the EU, which compelled our government to instill the necessary reforms, and one of this is the requirement of vessel monitoring for all commercial fishing vessels in our country.
Yeah, that's interesting. It shows the power of these warnings. Martin, I mean, you live in Australia, if I'm not mistaken. Is the situation any better?
It's certainly for our domestic fish, it's a lot easier, perhaps, because we already have vessel monitoring systems and the regulations surrounding that are well implemented. But clearly, if I go to the shop and I buy fish from anywhere around the world, that traceability and transparency is very rarely easily available. And so there is a lot of work to be done. As Gloria mentioned, eliminating IUU fishing is a key element, but there are many other layers of transparency that we're all interested in too. Social impacts, environmental impacts, and so much more, government regulations for that matter. Yeah. Okay,
well, thank you both. And what are the tools that you think could help improve this trust and transparency? Maybe Alistair, you could talk about it, given what you do at Eachmile Technology. Are we talking about traceability, cameras on fishing boats? What's the range of tools that could help achieve that trust and transparency?
To answer the first question as well, I also have limited trust in the veracity of the data in terms of the origin of fish. There are, like Martin mentioned before, there are a number of fisheries that in developed nations where you can be fairly confident, but there are over 12,000 species of seafood. So just product identification in itself is extremely difficult. Technologies, I mean, you can achieve traceability with pencil and paper. It's just a matter of trust. And obviously now we're using things like Excel to achieve traceability, but it doesn't build trust. So blockchain technologies have come to the fore recently to help build that trust, because it is an immutable record. What is written down cannot be edited, it cannot be changed. So blockchain has certainly come into the framework of all the technologies that are currently being touted as a solution. Yeah, there's a variety of different solutions. I think traceability is one thing, but it's the verification piece that is the difficult part. It's really what is the veracity of the data that's being entered into a system. And that's the difficult part.
Yeah, 100% agree. And well, we've spoken a tiny bit about these challenges now, but let's try to, give the audience a positive message. Maybe Gloria, would you have any recent example of something positive achieved with these tools in the Asia Pacific region lately?
Yes, the law as amended required vessel monitoring, but it took quite some time for government agencies to do it. So what we did was pilot test vessel monitoring to show that it worked. And we were able to convince decision makers in the region, in the local level, but at the national level, there was hesitancy. They still couldn't come up with the rules. So what we did, because we want the data to show that illegal fishing is pervasive, Oceana, together with the League of Municipalities of the Philippines, established this online platform. We call it Karagatan Patrol or Sea Patrol, which through the use of technology, this VIIRS satellite technology, can detect night lights. And in our legal framework, commercial fishing vessels are the ones with super lights, and these are prohibited. So this VIIRS technology detects the strong lights emitting from our municipal waters. So this process also compelled the government. There was pressure now for the government. We're able to show data that this is happening all over the country through the VIIRS technology, but we couldn't identify the vessels. So what we did was write to the mayors who were in charge of municipal waters to protect it from commercial fishing vessels encroachment, also the Department of the Interior local government, and of course the Bureau of Fisheries. And we sent them letters, and what's so great about it was the Department of the Interior local government, which exercises supervision over our coastal local authorities, required these municipalities, which is in our top 20 hotspot list, to explain what they've been doing to enforce the law. So this is a big win for us. And most important, after 4 years battle, we had to go to court to compel the Bureau of Fisheries to issue the regulations for vessel monitoring. On October last year, during COVID, the Secretary of Agriculture, DAR, issued the much-awaited regulations for vessel monitoring for all commercial fishing vessels. Now the local authorities are happy. They don't need to spend so much. The fisher folks likewise. But the journey continues. We have to ask, what's the compliance rate for the commercial fishing vessels? Are they in compliance? And one of the things that we did is really empower our enforcers. We do capacity training for enforcers apart from prosecutors and judges, and told them that they can already apprehend commercial fishing vessels without the tracking device, because that is a prohibited act. So all of this, I was talking about reforms. These are something positive which have not been done ever since.
That's good.
So that's why I'm excited to share all of
That's
this
good.
with you.
Yeah, I can totally hear it, and it's great to hear that. Talk about also the power of cooperation and also the importance of accountability. That's really interesting. Martin, on your side, would you also have any recent example to share? I'm particularly interested in also the positive impact that implementing traceability or transparency would have for the industry itself and therefore their investors. Would you have anything to share with us?
Yeah, if I could start, I mean, I'd like to support fully the great work that Gloria and her team have been doing with Oceana, Philippines, but also the technology and the challenge that Alistair's been able to address in terms of creating tools that can be used. And so for me, the issue is we've got a lot of solutions looking for problems. What we need to do is find, okay, so here's a problem. Gloria found a problem, which was IUU fishing, and was able to use a particular tool to address it, and then that pressure and so forth, which helped actually transform things. Alistair's talking blockchain. We use that in Australia with a number of fisheries over here and examples, but that's addressing sometimes a very different problem. So that's a traceability issue. So if I want to be able to say I caught this fish in that place on that day, and it was not inside a protected area, and I can demonstrate that using blockchain technology all the way through to the retailer, that's a fantastic outcome. But it's a different problem, if you like, because then you're dealing with a retailer or a consumer. And so there's an element, I think, François, of sort of unpacking the first question, which is, okay, what's your problem? And then what tools out of this toolbox can we apply to actually make it work? And I'd be super interested in hearing, you know, like from an Alistair's perspective, how the blockchain could assist in Gloria's work in reinforcing even how important that work is in eliminating the IUU fishing. It didn't answer your question particularly, but it was a nice hand pass to Alistair.
Well, Alistair, then feel free to explain how this could be achieved.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're looking at traceability or transparency. You know, it's a matter of disclosure of with transparency of where the boats are going and basically who's on board, for example, and what are they catching. Both target species and non-target species. So it's a little about traceability of the vessel itself, and then the product through the supply chain. Just going back to the systems, traceability really was used in the pharmaceutical industry first to make sure that drugs were safe moving through a supply chain, and there was no counterfeit drugs entering that supply chain. For the food industry, it's really been used for food recall purposes. It wasn't really so much about the problems of IUU fishing, where you don't really have 35% of the drugs that you take being illegal, unreported, or unregulated. So we have a massive challenge from that side. So systems were really sort of designed for intra-company needs, one up, one down, intra-company traceability as they transform the product. They're heterogeneous, they're proprietary, and they're often expensive. And so they're not really getting to the sort of 95% of the industry in terms of production and the workers, which is in developing nations. So when we talk about the problem as such, in Australia, we import 70% of our seafood. In the US, a lot of it is value-added overseas, but the total number is 90%. So it really is a big problem that we have to address. What are we talking about when we say transparency? What's the structured definition in and around transparency, and do we really need it? Is a question. So what we have done is a lot of NGOs and foundations have funded a lot of the development of electronic catch documentation schemes and systems. But the big problem with traceability is the business model. Who pays what, where, how in a supply chain is a real challenge. And that's why we're not seeing too much of adoption of these technologies, certainly at the start of the supply chain, because there's very limited return on investment. It's very hard to explain to a fisherman or a fish farmer in a developing nation what the return on investment is on a traceability system.
Can you? Sorry for interrupting you here, but just for the benefit of the audience, could you perhaps explain that in greater detail? So I think that's interesting. For me, in theory, it sounds like transparency is a win-win. However, you're just explaining all the related challenges, and one of them is clearly that the people demanding transparency or traceability are not necessarily the one that will benefit, and definitely or often not the one who will have to pay for the investment in such solution. So how do we solve that problem? And Gloria, Martin, if you have any idea, feel free to chip in.
Yeah, it's certainly a tough one. So I can only talk about what we've done. Really, and that is to try and decouple the cost and the benefit And yeah, we came up with a solution. First of all, we worked with the United States State Department on an MFISH initiative, which made it technologically and economically accessible. It was a free to use, free to access ECDT system where fishermen and fish farmers could enter the data. But we soon realized that actually there's no incentive for them to enter the data. In fact, there's a disincentive. Sometimes if the data is showing that the fish stocks are going down, then governments are compelled to act. Governments can't help fishermen catch more fish. They can only stop them from fishing. So there are disincentives as much as you need to consider the incentives as well for them to share their data. I'll come to it later on about one of our solutions that we've come up with. I think the other thing is in transparency, one of the greatest challenges is the industry is extremely data intensive. You need to have a lot of data to show that you're in compliance to, say, the Code of Conduct of Responsible Fishing. You need to show that the target species that you're capturing is sustainable. You need to know all the incidental catch. And in some instances, that can be 200 species in a bay are sustainable as well. And then on top of that, you need to demonstrate that there's no impact on the habitat. I'm not sure how you do that without base data at the same time. And then obviously the compliance to social standards, the crew welfare. And that's just the start of the supply chain. That could be fish going into a fish mill and then into fish feed integrators and then into a shrimp farm. And then you've got the issues of the environment on the fish farm. So it's extremely complex. There's a huge amount of data. And if you're demanding transparency, really, at the end of the day, you can be quite exposed. You're not in compliance. And then if you're not in compliance, are you negligent? Are you liable? And I think what's happening is that companies are clamping up. They're just asking the company prior in the supply chain to tick that box because I don't want to know. Because if I do know there's a problem and I don't act, am I negligible?
Well, that's an interesting point you made, and it made me think of something else, which is supply chain in seafood are very long and complex, but everything you've mentioned, talking about data, investment in traceability, etc., suppose a certain level of basically cash and financial firepower, if you want. But what about small scale fisheries? I'm talking about artisanal fisheries or up to mid-scale fisheries. How do we ensure that these actors have access to the latest technology that then are able to feed through the entire supply chain? Gloria, for instance, that's something on which you were quite involved, if I understood. Would you have any idea?
Yes, we're pushing forward towards ecosystem-based management, which of course requires science-based management. So in 2019, we established the fisheries management areas, which is science-based, transparent, participatory. So our fisher folks are made part of the management body, and now all 12 fisheries management areas have their management bodies. We know that so much has to be done. When you were talking about catchability or traceability, my feeling is we're just starting, even if it's in our legal framework, but we need to have management plans for each of these fisheries management areas. So what Oceana did was come up with a scorecard, which would be a guidance for the fisheries manager to look into, for them to be able to go into management plans, sustainable intervention. And, the Secretary of Agriculture issued the National Sardine Management Plan, but none of the fisheries management areas have so far integrated that. So it takes a lot of effort to do it. And our fisher folks, what we are doing is we reach out to our small scale fishers or artisanal fishers because we want them to be able to voice out, articulate what's happening, because they are the poorest of the poor. The Philippines is considered the center of the center of marine biodiversity in the entire world, yet the wealth has not cascaded to our small scale fishers. I'm so glad under this pandemic they have adapted the technology. Now we can reach out to them through digital technology, and we are helping them, empower them for them to know. And now they're demanding, they're asking government why all these interventions, because the data is there, have not been met. So now, government has to do double time in the efforts, because now we have empowered fisher folks who are demanding why all of these measures are not being addressed. And catchability, traceability in our country, the post-harvest facilities are something that really have to be addressed. There's a lot of food wastage because there's no ice storage for them. And my God, in a country like ours, food wastage is like a mortal sin, right?
Yeah.
So we're still in that process, but you can be sure that we are working, collaborating with government for them to know that we have to address this seriously. So I'm very much interested with the technologies from your countries, because I'm sure these digital platforms or tools will be essential to fast track all of these measures.
Interesting. Thank you, Gloria, which begs the question, sorry, Martin, you wanted to say?
Is that okay? Well, yeah, because I think that was a really important statement from Gloria there, which, the key is actually not so much the tool, but that the inclusiveness. And equally, Alistair mentioned it before, which was that the full supply chain. And I think that, to me, is something that we keep missing, is the message, right? Which is you have to run it from the producer right the way through to the consumer. You can't expect change to happen just by playing with one end of the lever. And you also need to have government on board, because you need regulations to be in place so that those that are doing the right thing are able to maintain incentives for doing the right thing. Because otherwise what happens is, if I'm selling my fish to Alistair and I say all of my fish is legal, and he says that's wonderful and you can prove it traceable, that's fabulous, but I'm not going to pay you 1 cent more than the fish I buy from François. And François is not doing any traceability. So that's a problem instantly, right? Yeah, you would be, I know. But so I think the key and the inclusiveness for the community-based fisheries is essential. They can drive change so that you get rid of the IUU fishing that is impacting their livelihoods. And an incentive for them may not be we can sell for a higher price at market. It may just be we can actually catch enough food to feed our families. And it's identifying that problem and the challenge, and then using the tools to actually address it, I think. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, that's perfect, and it's exactly what I wanted to ask actually to Alistair. It was an easy question again. All what I've heard in the last few minutes begs me the question, how much does increased transparency cost? Maybe that's the elephant in the room, how much does it cost? Because as you said, if you're not willing to pay an additional cent for Alistair's fish compared to my fish that is of really bad origin, how are we going to solve this issue? So Alistair, maybe would you be able to tell us?
That's a good question. It depends on the type of fishery we're dealing with. I mean, if you want transparency of what's happening at sea, you need to have the vessels tracked at sea, and there's a cost to that. The best technology really is the electronic monitoring cameras on vessels. It's better than observers. Observers either can be corrupted or they can end up being disposed of at sea. They can be murdered at sea. So it depends on the type of operation you're talking about and how much it would cost. And it's also relative to the price that the product as a percentage. So if you're dealing with something like abalone or bluefin tuna, it's a very high cost species. But if you're dealing with a low cost species, then the relative cost of the system can be quite high. But actually, traceability itself from the landing, as I said before, can just be done from with pencil and paper. But like we were talking about before, there's the sort of real issue is that there is no desire for transparency. We can apply this, so the problem is not one of technology. It's one of concern about disintermediation. If you're a middleman, you don't want to be circumvented. You don't want the buyer to go around you and go direct to the fisherman. Mentioned before about compliance to standards is very difficult. You need a lot of data for that. We don't have that data. So there is some pushback on the transparency side of things. But also, it's, you know, if we applied technology such as time temperature sensors, we could move away from sort of risk-based use-by dates that make us throw away perfectly good seafood to evidence-based best before date. I mean, we're throwing away 40 to 60% of our seafood through supply chains, discarding it or losing it. That's a major problem. But the reality there is that there's someone in that supply chain making money when someone has to throw away perfectly good fish because they have to put another purchase order. So it's, a lot of it lies really in the problem with the intermediaries that do not want to be circumvented. They do not want transparency involved, and they flourish off information asymmetry as well. So we believe that trading platforms have the power to disrupt that. As the trading platform is trading transparently a product from a fisher or a farmer, it's in the interest of that platform to ensure that the product is legal, reported, regulated, that it's authentic, that it's safe, and help that fisher or farmer produce the best quality consistently that it can in compliance to sustainability standards, and making sure that everyone from the crew all the way through are not indentured or enslaved slavery conditions. So we believe platforms have the ability, but traceability is you know, the first step. And I sort of say that it's mission critical, because if we don't have traceability then in our supply chain, then there's no way for us to identify, verify, and reward sustainable, responsible production. There's a study by Standard Chartered Bank that showed that firms only have, there's only 6% of firms that have traceability in their supply chain. But it's absolutely mission critical. It should be required, and the cost of it should be absorbed. This can't be an externality anymore. It should be factored into the price. We shouldn't have to pay a premium for a product that's low risk of being caught by a slave or processed by a child in an unsustainable manner. The whole thought of that is kind of abhorrent. I think our future generations are going to judge us on that. So it has to be factored in. It has to be paid for by the market in the pricing. We've come up with a token that allows the market to price the traceability data called the Fishcoin project, and allows the downstream actors to reward the upstream actors for sharing their data, and allows them to determine what the value of that data is through negotiation, which will always be pegged to the value and the volume of fish that's being traded. And ideally, it's written off as a business expense by the importer. So they'll get blockchain traceability, but the market will pay through tax reductions as well for paying for that data, and provide revenues for governments in developing nations for monitoring, control, surveillance, and research and development activities, as well as informing policies and improved management.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Alistair. That's also something we've identified in our work. And so would you say that in an ideal world, fish that is fully traceable and comes from transparent origin, if you want, doesn't trade at a premium, but it's, if you want, the one that is not, the one that is of, you know, fishy origin that trades at a discount to the rest, while at the same time, the trading platforms, if you want, or the processors, the buyers, or whatever you name them, the middlemen, if you prefer, that do not comply with traceability actually might be cut off, especially with the rise of a consumer to, like a producer to consumer supply chain. Is that something idealistic? And maybe I can ask Gloria or Martin to answer that as well.
Well, in the Philippines, where 2/3 of the fishing grounds are overfished, are overexploited, a collapsed fishery is too much cost. That's why we have to listen to our fisher folks. They are at the mercy of the middlemen, and they would like to be able to sell their produce. They don't have much, but they don't even want much. They just want to have enough for their families, but right now they're at the mercy of the brokers. So we have to do something about it, and as mentioned, inclusiveness is important. They have to be part of the decision making process, and you know they're more knowledgeable than PhD holders because they're there every day. They know what the problem is. They know what the solution is, but they're just shut off. So it's so important to listen to them and for government to provide all the platforms, this is also an equity issue. How come there's no ice storage provided for them by government? It's the duty of the government to do that. How come there are now apps that can connect them with the buyers, but how come that's not being done? So this is not just about market, it's also about equity. I mean, they're just so invisible right now, but I'm happy to see that they are now more assertive and knowing that they know their rights, and it's so important that we address those.
Interesting, yeah. And well, it's led me to one thing that we've heard throughout the conversation today was the need for greater cooperation. Effectively, the word wasn't mentioned, but that's what I hear. There are many initiatives that try to advance transparency. Was let's say Oceana through your work, and for instance, you, Alistair, through technologies. But how do you get all these initiatives to work together, rather than, except of course speaking on a panel like today, but how do you actually work together?
If I might, I think perhaps a really good example is the way that first off, industry is starting to work together and build trust right through the supply chain, because as we've all mentioned, it's pretty low at times between producer, middleman, retailer, wholesaler, it doesn't matter. Secondly, the recognition from science and industry and civil society that governments need a hand to manage fisheries really well too. So we can use transparency and traceability to help, first off, put pressure perhaps on governments to do the right thing, and to actually create regulations and enforce them. And Gloria's example is perfect for that, where you show that by highlighting the issue and by doing it collaboratively, the government can raise those regulatory boundaries and make sure everyone abides by them. And then lastly, it comes back to me to getting a clear focus on what we're trying to achieve, and all agreeing on that focus. And you can only do that by sitting down and having a good open dialogue. A great example, I would say at the moment, is in the Western Central Pacific, where many of us from the outside are looking in at the governments saying, you need to improve your governance. You need to implement really much better management regulations. And that's coming from science, from industry, from civil society, from buyers. And I think that is the sort of pressure that I hope will actually drive much greater transparency and traceability in the future.
That's a very good point, and it's interesting. But in terms of so I understand the pressure on the government. If you're, let's say, you're an investor or a corporate or someone who just wants to advance the cause of transparency, if you want, through, let's say, through their investment or through their Yeah, let's say through the investment. How can you actually do that, Martin?
Well, I think the instant first thing you would do is, as an investor, is seek alignment with existing programs that will exist at different parts of the supply chain. So identify where there's a really strong, as Alistair talks, the blockchain technology. So that is an easy start. And then I think actually focus in on trying to break the problem down to its component parts. Prove one thing can be done really well. Address, it doesn't matter, pick a topic, address IUU fishing, right? And really just focus as an investor on, okay, I'm going to invest, then let's make that happen. And then once you make that happen, then let's go, wow, that worked. Now let's look at social issues, or let's look at bycatch, or whatever it might be. And I think we have great opportunity and too many really good initiatives, so we're dissipating that power that we can really bring with investors being involved. Sorry.
Thank you.
Talking too much.
No, that's all perfect. Thank you. And actually, yes, conscious of time. So, Gloria, maybe for you, a word for the end. If there's one thing that you would like the audience to take home with them today, what would that be?
Never underestimate the power of communities. They make change happen, and government has to listen, has no choice but to listen. And that's exactly what's happening, I'd like to believe, in our country amidst all of the challenges, but now with stronger voices from various sectors working together, as Martin said. Especially on the issue ensuring stricter monitoring, control, and surveillance. I think that would also be welcome even by private investors, because they would like to be in places where there's stability, there's predictability, and definitely we can all work together. After all, we only have one ocean, and we need each other, and we have to do that.
Thank you. And Alistair, same question for you.
Yeah, I wouldn't demand transparency. I would encourage it, try and facilitate it where you can. Obviously, provenance and storytelling is important and can create demand pool for the products. However, really, at the end of the day, you need to enable traceability right from the start. You need to incentivize traceability systems in the first mile. The data, traceability is the rails for data. It's the data not only to show that the stock is sustainable, but also that the environment is being managed in such a way that is not destructive, that the crew, the social data that added to that, the food safety data, the authenticity data, and then sustainability, compliance standards. And then that can help de-risk and assess risk for insurance and finance to come in and just basically take that supply chain to the next level. So the key is data. The key is traceability. It's not transparency right now. We need traceability to make sure it's legal, reported, and regulated.
Thank you.
That should be our focus.
Well, that was very clear. Thank you. Focus on traceability. Martin, a word for the end.
So I agree with both Gloria and Alistair. I'm easy. I think it's important to separate transparency and traceability. I think that's really a key, as Alistair said, and encourage dialogue and encourage much greater understanding of what is happening in our fisheries. Yeah, thank you.
That was very helpful, actually, and the keywords that we'll remember then: cooperation and traceability. And thank you very much. Yes, such an exciting topic, and I could talk with you much longer, but unfortunately we've got 40 minutes. Yeah, it was great, Gloria, Alistair, Martin. It was really great to hear from you with a concrete example as well. That was much appreciated. So thank you. I can only thank you again for your contribution and your time. And I'll also thank the audience for watching this panel. I hope you enjoyed it, and I also hope that you will enjoy the rest of the World Ocean Summit Asia Pacific. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.